Want to say thank you for making ATL Day Ones your first listen today. Why don't you make your second listen Locked On Sports today? They have all the national news and everything that you're absolutely looking for as far as the take of the day, just like we do for the culture. You can check out Locked On Sports today to get all the national information that you absolutely need. And you can find it wherever you download this podcast. Now, I know you're probably looking and saying, like, okay, where's Tenitra? She's not here with us right now, but I do have my guy, Brad Rowland, from Locked On Hawks joining us today. Obviously, with the NBA trade deadline. Brad, I got to start off with this one. Saddiq Bey, what does he bring to the table, and what are the Hawks thinking when bringing a guy like this in?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Landry Fields talked to the media very late last night as we're recording this and talked a lot about depth, and that was the big thing for me. Saddiq Bey as a player is like a combo forward, pretty good shooter, a decent size, like does some stuff pretty well. He's not going to light the world on fire for you necessarily, but a guy who brings another sort of versatile, capable forward to the mix. And as you well know, the Hawks don't have a lot of depth this year. Whenever guys have gone down, they've kind of fallen off a cliff. And I think that was the biggest thing here is that also he's also pretty cheap, which is probably part of the calculus as well. They avoid the luxury tax. But the big thing on the court is just bringing in another guy who they can sort of trust to be out there and plug some holes and really help the depth.
And that was one of the things that I've been kind of rumbling through in my mind, and I was just like, okay, when you going into the trade deadline, I was thinking Tenitra and I have talked about on the show at nauseum about like what the Hawks should do going into this thing, right? Should they stand pat? Should they try to make a move and go ahead and try to be better and compete this year, and then figure out in the summer? So and I think that that seems like what Landry Fields' line of thinking was. Okay, I'm not going to trade any of my big pieces because we know John Collins has been rumored to be leaving this team for the past 10 years now. So I think that when you think about, this line of thinking, do you feel like John Collins will finally stick around at going forward or let me say this. Do you think he'll be able to finish out his contract as an Atlanta Hawk?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think that honestly, I've always been a big fan of John's. I think he is very, very useful and very good and a very sort of versatile. He's gotten a lot better in a lot of different ways. I think it's been overlooked nationally just to say all that. They do value him. Like they've definitely wanted to keep him around at a certain price. Like I think they would have moved him. Obviously, he has been very available, as we all know, but they also refuse to give him away. They have a price. Nobody's meeting it. And I think that's because they know John is a good player. And just because of all of that, especially if they win down the stretch this season, that would probably help things as well. But I wouldn't go quite as far as to finish the contract. That's a long time in the future.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I thought was pretty interesting last night in watching the game, I think Lauren Jabbar had interviewed John Collins and she kind of hinted around the trade deadline and him kind of playing a little differently last night. I know I saw a difference in his play last night. Like, because I know for me, like John Collins has always been willing to talk. If you put a microphone in front of his face, he's been willing to answer those questions that are quote unquote looked at as tough. So, and I appreciate him for that. But when you see the type of play that he had last night on the court, like, is it fair to want to see that on a consistent basis, even with all the rumors flying around?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable, and like I think last night was interesting. Like the timing was funny because he also got set up with a few like obviously his dunks get a lot of attention. That's kind of the big thing with John. Kind of always has been, and I think he had 4 dunks last night. He was very active. I think he's played hard this year. Like Nate got a question about that after the game last night, kind of through what you're asking me about, and he was kind of like, look, he plays hard all the time. Like they were kind of downplaying it. And I get it. And I think consistency-wise, he's not been quite as good this year on offense in particular. Defensively, he's been, I think, the best he's ever been this year, to be honest.
Indeed, yes.
But I think it's fair. And also, I want to stress always, like, these guys are human. And I think it's not fun to be in rumors for basically 3 straight seasons. And he's played hard, and he got a lot of praise from Landry and Nate and the team last night for being a pro this whole time. But I'm sure, it's not the easiest thing in the world. So maybe this will be a weight off his shoulders. He can kind of be free. Like, all right, at least I got 6 more months in Atlanta. I know what's going on, and I can just kind of go out there and just play. And that's something he said, I think, in that interview you're talking about with Lauren. Just go out there and play and be free of that. So maybe that's help him. Maybe that will help him between that and maybe some jump shooting regression in a positive way. I think he'll be better in the second half of the season.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking forward to him to bringing that consistency because we all know the capabilities that he has. I'm just the type of guy I want to see it more often.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's too much to ask when you talk about John. Now, as far as now, we haven't got a chance to talk about the whole Nick Wrestler piece coming into play, Landry Fields and the Kyle Korver organizational structure right now. Like, I don't know where Nick Wrestler sits, and you may be able to give me some insight on that, but I want to kind of ask you about this new structure from the front office standpoint, and how do you feel like these guys are going to try to make? Obviously, they want to be able to put a stamp and say, "Hey," and prove that, "Hey, we belong here." But how do you feel that they can do that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because the Hawks were already kind of formed as a team before this changeover. Not that they can't make changes, but more than a lot of teams really around the league, the Hawks have this extended core that's under contract, and like you kind of have to make trades to change this roster. Like there's not a whole lot of turnover happening in terms of just contracts ending or whatever, and also taking over midseason is very strange. Like especially for a team that's pretty decent and where the Hawks
Right.
have been, you don't often see a front office change in December. That's a very strange thing. And it kind of adds another layer of it that you kind of mentioned it, but this is a first time group. Landry Fields has been an assistant GM in the past, but not a lead decision maker. Kyle Korver is pretty fresh off the court. He's only been off the court for a few years.
Right.
The Nick Wrestler piece is interesting too, but I think going into the summer is where I kind of have been circling like their opportunity to make some more sweeping changes if they want to do that. I think what they did at the deadline was essentially not make a big decision, which is not a bad thing, but they added to the team and they gave up a lot of second round picks, but they didn't make a huge like affirmative move one way or the other. They could have torn down, they could have built up, and they kind of just did a little bit on the margins. And that was a safe approach, which I'm okay with. I get all that, but I think that we'll see more this summer in particular, and then going beyond that, like what they actually are about. Because I had a good read on Travis Schlenk, and I've admitted on my podcast, like I don't have a read on Landry and Kyle and that's not a bad thing, but they just haven't had the transaction cycles to like where you can learn more information and talk to these guys. So it's a big question mark for me, but they certainly will have more of an opportunity when it comes to this summer.
Yeah, I think that like the read that you talk about on Travis, I feel like I had a pretty decent read on him as well. Just from I like the moves that he's made. I don't think he gets a lot of credit. A lot of people discredit him when it comes to what he was able to accomplish as the lead decision maker for this team, and I think he did an overall pretty solid job. Now, granted, did he pay a couple of people that he probably shouldn't have? Maybe, or that's up for discussion. But I think overall he did a pretty bang up job. Now, as far as go back to the depth piece that you talked about earlier, and like one of the things that I cringe sometimes that I see in games when Nate McMillan brings Bo in. I call him Bogdan Bogdanovich. When he brings Bo in and he plays at that three slot, and I think that when that substitution, when DeAndre Hunter comes out of the game, I think there was just a pretty big drop off from a defensive standpoint, or even bringing AJ Griffin into that piece to the fold. Where do you see AJ Griffin falling now that you got a guy like Saddiq Bey who can come in at the three? Do you see AJ kind of moving towards playing that two guard position, or how do you think that plays out with Nate?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's one of the things that I'm looking for in the first couple of weeks when Saddiq comes in. Is like how this all breaks down. I think AJ has pretty firmly entrenched as a rotation piece for this team. Like obviously the future is super bright with AJ. I think everybody
Yes.
knows that.
Yes.
But I think that he has been the guy that basically since he joined the rotation early in the season, he's never come out. Like he's always been out there for a limited, sometimes limited time, but he's kind of carved out that role, and he's got the physical strength to play the three. He can play the two. He's played a little bit of two. And one of the points about Saddiq Bey is that, like you said, the Hawks don't really have a traditional three other than Hunter on this roster that's been playing. Bogey
Right.
and Griffin are probably a little bit more on the two side. AJ, I think in the future will kind of play up more at the three. But Bey, they talked about this kind of, I think, 4 or 5 times last night. Bey, they see it as a 3-4. So like he's going to play a little bit of three. He'll play a little bit of four. He's a little bit bigger, a little bit stockier than Bogey. And I think that honestly, this is unfortunate, but the guy I'd be worried about losing playing time is Jalen Johnson. And I think that's the thing. Like I'm not saying that's right, but if you're Jalen Johnson right now, I think there's some pressure on you to maybe keep your spot, because the Hawks only have 10 guys. They don't have they don't have too many guys. I saw some of that last night. That's not really going to be a thing. But if everybody's healthy, I could see Nate leaning on Saddiq Bey more as the backup 4 sometimes, and that might cut into Jalen's time. But I think AJ, given his future, given the way he's played and the shooting in particular, where they still need that shooting pretty badly, I think he's going to play every night, whether it's a 2 or the 3. But Jalen's the guy that I'm a little bit concerned that he might start playing a little bit less.
Yeah, and when you think about that uncertainty that Jalen Johnson displays when it comes to shooting the 3, Saddiq Bey don't have any issues whatsoever putting it up from behind the arc. Yeah. So I think there may be something. I think you're onto something when it comes to Jalen Johnson not getting as much playing time. Now, last one before we get out here, I gotta ask this one, man. Like, this is the question that I don't want to ask, but I feel like I have to. Like, are we gonna be talking about Trae Young being disgruntled and wanting to get a trade in the next couple of seasons, Brad? Please answer this correctly.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there obviously was a little bit of noise a few weeks ago, some of the rumblings that are out there. And look, anytime a team is not winning, the stuff just comes out. It is what it is. Guys are frustrated, and the Hawks are underachieving this year. At least as we speak right now, they're 500. That wasn't anybody's plan for this season, especially after the Murray trade. Anytime you're not winning, guys are not thrilled. And whether it's Trae or whether it's other guys, like, just the vibe wasn't great, the front office changeover, all that stuff. And that leads to leaks, that leads to media stuff. And I get all that. I've always thought basically the only way Trae's leaving is if Trae wants to leave and makes it very, very clear that he wants to leave. I can't see the Hawks proactively trading Trae Young. I know that was kind of out there too. I can't see that really happening. But could it be possible in 2 years if the Hawks are still underachieving in Trae's mind that he starts looking around like, all right, what about somewhere else? In the NBA, that happens. It's not I know it's sort of taboo to talk about it because like just the way you asked the question, it's kind of the same way.
I don't want to talk about it.
Nobody wants it to happen. I'm not rooting for that. It is what it is. But if you look at the track record in the NBA, KD just got traded the other day. These guys at the highest levels, if they're not happy, they can get out if they want to get out. And I'm not saying Trae's going to want to, but if he ever says, all right, it's time, he's a clutch client. That wouldn't probably hurt him. They could probably
they can make it happen.
Right. They've got guys, they've made it happen before. So
yes.
I think if you're the Hawks, there's a little bit of internal pressure, just to be honestly, I think they know that they have to win, or Trae in a couple years. I'm not saying right now, but a couple years might be like, all right, guys, it's time to win. And that's one of the things about the run to the conference finals is that it might have spoiled everybody a little bit. And all right, man, we already did this. And now it's like, we want to get back there. And if anytime you're not back there, maybe the frustration is even a little bit more. If it had been more incremental, maybe it's a little bit easier. But yeah, I could certainly see it in a couple years if the Hawks aren't winning. But if they win, I think he'll be here long term and probably be happier, and everybody's vibes will be better.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you think about what you're saying is just so true. Because there are even some rumblings about Luka probably potentially wanting out if they don't get it right in Dallas. So hey, and that was the guy he was traded for. So
it's very similar across the board there.
Absolutely. So we already know what kind of juice the NBA players got in today's game. Brad, man, I really appreciate your time today, man. Thanks for joining us, and please don't let this be the last time.
I'm happy to come on anytime you need me or want me, or don't even want me, but just need somebody to come on and fill in. I'm happy to do whatever you need. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. He is Brad T. Rowland of Locked on Hawks. We're coming up next, guys. It is For the Culture, and we're talking about wings, and it's going down.